Okay, let's unpack this. You know how sometimes you finish a big project, maybe a report, a book, whatever it is, and you think, okay, done, covered everything.
Yeah, you feel like you've nailed the main structure, the core arguments are all there, solid.
But then after you've sort of put down the pen or closed the file, something else emerges.
Right, insights that weren't really part of the original plan.
Maybe things you weren't quite ready to say before, or things that the current moment suddenly makes feel really urgent, chapters that, in a way, kind of write you, rather than you writing them.
That's a fascinating idea right there. That the work itself can sometimes demand more revealing perspectives or truths that were maybe latent until the main job was done. It really speaks to a dynamic relationship, doesn't it? Between the leader, their work, and, well, the world they're operating in. Leadership isn't static. It has to be responsive.
Absolutely. And that responsive sort of emergent quality, that's exactly what we're diving into today. Our source material comes from these excerpts called Episode 3, The Chapters I Couldn't Not Write.
Right.
And this is part of a larger work, Global Leadership Insights 2030, How to Communicate, Connect, and Lead Across Cultures, with a specific focus on bridging East and West through visionary leadership and cultural empathy.
And the author is Oliver Werner Nightingale, also known as Lóng Tíng. He's the founder of Lóng Tíng Enterprises. And his insights are presented as really personal, drawn from his own, deep cross-cultural experiences, especially navigating between East and West. So this isn't some abstract theoretical thing.
No, definitely not from an ivory tower.
No, it feels grounded in like a lived reality of bridging these worlds.
Right. And he makes a point of emphasizing that these specific chapters we're looking at, they were unplanned, not in the initial manuscript. They came after he thought the book was basically finished. But he felt they were, and this is a quote, too vital, too close to soul, too urgent to wait.
Wow. Too urgent to wait. That really hits, doesn't it?
It does.
It feels like these weren't just optional add-ons. They were like necessities dictated by the moment itself.
Exactly.
It points to a leader who's really tuned in, to the pulse of what's happening now. Someone who gets that, okay, strategic planning is crucial, yes.
Sure.
But real leadership also needs that capacity to listen to what's emerging, to these new needs and realities, even if they mess up your beautiful plan.
Right, even if it's inconvenient.
Yeah, it's leadership that, like the source says, listens even after the meeting ends. It's about that continuous process, perception, response, not just ticking off tasks.
So our mission then for this deep dive is to really unpack these essential unplanned chapters.
Yeah, into them.
Yeah, understand why they were felt to be so vital, why they had to be written, and what they tell us about where global leadership is heading, towards 2030 and beyond.
And importantly, what can you, listening right now, take away from these kind of unexpected insights?
How do they challenge or maybe affirm your own approach to leadership or even just collaboration?
We're really looking at what happens when, a deep commitment to a topic meets this sensitivity to the present moment. And it compels a leader to say things that maybe weren't planned but just became undeniable.
Okay, so where should we start? Which chapter came first?
Well, let's start with the first of these compelling unplanned chapters he mentions.
Okay, so the author notes that this first chapter he felt he had to add was the one he actually held back the longest.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's the chapter on LGBTQIA plus leadership and global belonging. And he's very clear. It wasn't held back because he doubted its truth.
Right.
It was because he knew, and again, this is a quote, the cost to say it fully.
That phrase, the cost to say it fully, that immediately grabs you, doesn't it?
It really does.
It suggests that talking about this authentically from, lived experience and real conviction, it comes with a price. Personally, maybe professionally too.
Especially in a global context.
Exactly. Where acceptance and rights for LGBTQIA plus people vary so much. Speaking openly, leading from that identity. It takes vulnerability. It invites pushback, maybe even real risk. It highlights that authentic leadership isn't always comfortable. Often, it demands real courage.
And the core idea he puts forward is, well, it's kind of surprising. He says, queer leadership is not about visibility.
Right. That immediately makes you pause. Because the common narrative, the one we hear all the time, is that representation and visibility are everything for marginalized groups.
Yeah, paramount.
And look, the source isn't saying visibility doesn't matter at all. Representation is important. It inspires, it challenges stereotypes.
Of course.
But the argument here is that visibility is often just the surface level. Maybe a necessary first step, sure, but not the defining thing, not the ultimate goal of really effective queer leadership. The real power, this source suggests, lies somewhere deeper.
Okay, so where does it lie? He elaborates, saying it's about reimagining power without domination, safety without silence, and legacy without lineage.
Okay, let's break those down, because each one is huge.
Definitely. Let's spend some real time here. Reimagining power without domination. How does that connect specifically to queer leadership? And, what might that look like in the real world?
Well, think about the historical experience globally for LGBTQIA plus individuals. It's often been about being subject to dominant power structures.
Legal restrictions, social stigma, religious condemnation.
Exactly. Power wielded over the community. So if leadership is emerging from that experience, then reimagining power without domination isn't just some nice idea. It's fundamental. It's a necessary way to operate, and it's a vision for a totally different kind of world.
So it's not just about, say, getting a seat at the existing table.
Right.
If that table's built on principles of domination.
Precisely. It's about questioning and maybe fundamentally changing the nature of the power itself, how it operates.
How so? Like, what kind of practical ways?
It could look like leadership that really prioritizes collaboration over control, influence over just raw authority, collective empowerment instead of just one person calling the shots. It's a rejection of that whole impulse to dominate, which has historically been used to oppress. Think about consensus-building models or decentralized networks or leadership styles that actively foster autonomy in others. Those could be expressions of power without domination.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, let's move to the second part.
Yeah.
Safety without silence. We talk a lot about creating safe spaces. How does adding without silence change that? What does it add?
Yeah, safe space can sometimes just mean a place where you won't face, like overt discrimination or violence, basic physical or verbal safety.
Which is important, obviously.
Crucial. But this suggests true safety goes further. Safety without silence means you're not just free from harm, but you're also free to be fully who you are, to speak your truth, express your identity, share your experiences, without feeling like you have to censor yourself or stay quiet just to keep that safety.
Ah, okay. So a space where you're basically just tolerated as long as you keep quiet. That doesn't meet this definition.
Exactly. That's conditional safety. If acceptance depends on your silence or your invisibility, that's not real belonging, is it?
Yeah.
Safety without silence implies an environment where your voice isn't just allowed, it's actually welcomed, it's valued. And in a global leadership context, that's incredibly tough because cultural norms around expression and identity are so different everywhere.
So leaders aiming for this have to actively build environments where diverse voices aren't just, heard passively.
But encouraged, integrated, pulled in.
Right. Okay. And the third piece, legacy without lineage. Legacy usually makes us think of bloodlines, inheritance, passing things down through established channels.
Yeah, traditional hierarchies.
So what does it mean to build a legacy without that?
Well, conventional legacy often is tied to passing something on through biological ties or formal structures, like you said, inheriting a business, a title, a family name, power within an institution. But for individuals or whole communities who've been historically shut out of those traditional lines of succession or had them disrupted, well, the whole idea of legacy has to be redefined.
So it's about making an impact that goes beyond those traditional structures.
Yes, exactly. Legacy without lineage suggests a legacy built on, say, ideas, on movements, cultural contributions, fostering change, building community, inspiring future generations through your example or your wisdom.
Rather than just inheriting a position or property.
Precisely. It's about the lasting impact of your work, your values, your influence on the world. And that impact is independent of whether you followed conventional lines of descent. Think about, activists, artists, thinkers, whose impact completely reshapes society, often without any traditional lineage to inherit or pass on.
It's powerful stuff. And the author really grounds these ideas in personal experience. He says he's writing from within it. Mentions Knights of Exile being welcome in theory but erased in tone at conferences, and the ancestral weight of hiding and healing. This isn't academic theory.
No, you can feel the lived experience behind it. That's the source of these insights, Knights of Exile. That evokes such a strong feeling of isolation, doesn't it? Being on the outside, maybe literally unwelcome, or just feeling emotionally cut off from the mainstream.
And that welcome in theory but erased in tone.
Yeah, that's the particularly painful kind of exclusion, right? Where on paper, everything's inclusive, you get the conference invite, maybe your identity is acknowledged
But
formally.
the vibe is wrong.
Exactly. The subtle cues, the language people use, the assumptions made in the coffee breaks,
Yeah.
it all makes you feel invisible or like the real you isn't actually welcome there.
It's that gap between formal inclusion and actually feeling like you belong.
That's it perfectly.
Hmm.
And the ancestral weight of hiding and healing,
Yeah.
that's such a profound phrase. It acknowledges historical trauma.
Mhm.
It speaks to that cumulative burden passed down from generations who had to hide who they were just to survive. The psychological toll of that hiding and the ongoing, continuous process of healing from that wound. Leadership coming from that space carries the memory of that history and also the drive to create a future where hiding isn't necessary anymore.
And he links this back to the meaning of pride, stating very clearly, pride is not a brand.
Which is such an important corrective today, isn't it?
Yeah.
Pride events often get so commercialized, draped in corporate logos and marketing speak. The source pushes back hard against that. It reminds us that, at its core, pride isn't a product to be bought or sold. It's fundamentally a memory of resistance that belongs to all of us.
A memory of resistance.
Yeah, calling back to moments like Stonewall and the long, hard fight for basic human rights and dignity. It's a reminder that progress didn't just happen, it came through resistance, through people standing up and saying, enough.
And that phrase belongs to all of us.
That broadens it. Right. It suggests the struggle for liberation, for authenticity, is universal. It can resonate with and inform anyone who's challenging oppression or trying to live more fully.
So, putting it all together, the call to leadership that comes out of this chapter is to lead in ways that disrupt without dehumanizing. How does that connect back to power, safety, and legacy?
Well, disruption is needed, right?
Yeah.
To challenge those old paradigms, those systems that keep reinforcing domination and silence and these exclusive ideas of legacy.
But disruption can get messy. It can be harsh.
It absolutely can. It can be violent or harmful if it ignores the humanity of the people involved, even the people who are upholding the old systems you're trying to change.
Okay, so if you're trying to lead with power without domination and ensure safety without silence and build legacy without lineage, you're inherently disrupting things.
You have to be. You're disrupting those oppressive structures by your very approach.
But the key is how you disrupt.
Precisely. If you reimagine power away from dominance, you disrupt controlling hierarchies. If you insist on safety without silence, you disrupt cultures of conformity and fear. If you build legacy outside traditional lineage, you disrupt inherited privilege and make space for different kinds of contributions to be valued.
And the without dehumanizing part means the methods you use matter.
Absolutely. Prioritizing dialogue, empathy, upholding dignity that ensures that while you're challenging the paradigms, you're not just discarding or dehumanizing the people caught up in them.
Wow. Okay. This chapter, even though it comes from a specific perspective, offers really powerful lessons for any leader who's serious about inclusion and systemic change.
Definitely.
It challenges you, doesn't it? Regardless of your own identity, it makes you think about the power you hold, how you use it, the real depth of the safety you create, the kind of legacy you're actually building.
Are you accidentally propping up systems you claim to oppose? How can you disrupt things constructively?
It really pushes us beyond just talking about inclusivity to practicing it with deep empathy and being willing to tackle those subtle, often unspoken ways people get excluded.
Yeah, it's about moving from theory to practice.
Okay, let's shift gears to the next unplanned chapter. Here, the author mentions being initially reluctant to talk about himself, but feeling he had to because, as he says, founding is not a career move, it's a commitment to coherence.
That distinction feels really important. A career move sounds transactional.
Yeah, something you do for advancement, status, money. It's about how it looks on your resume, maybe? Externally focused?
Right. Whereas a commitment to coherence, that sounds internal. It suggests alignment, making sure that what you're putting out into the world, what you're building, actually lines up with your core values, your vision, your sense of purpose.
Like an act of integrity.
Exactly. Making your external work match your internal world. Coherent.
And he defines the act of founding itself with this really powerful statement. To found something in this world is to say, this didn't exist yet, and it matters that it does.
That just cuts right to the heart of creation, doesn't it?
It really does.
It's about seeing a gap or a need or maybe just a possibility and having the conviction, the drive to bring something new into existence to fill it and believing in its value It matters that it does.
And this isn't just about starting a company, is it?
No, not at all. It could be founding anything, really. An organization, a project, a community initiative, even just a new way of thinking or doing things, as long as it's intentional and aims to make a meaningful difference.
He gives 3 examples from his own work: Journey to the West, Thunder Dragon Games, and RES Energy. They seem pretty different: cultural, gaming, energy.
They cover diverse fields, for sure. But the source puts them all under this banner of founding with soul. The implication seems to be that the act of founding, if it comes from that place of soul, that commitment to coherence, that underlying principle is the same no matter the industry. You're bringing something necessary and meaningful into the world.
And crucially, he says he presents these not as brands, but as living questions about how we create systems without replicating oppression.
Okay, that connects right back to the previous chapter's theme. Disrupting without dehumanizing, avoiding replication of harm.
Yeah. And reframing a project or a company as a living question. That's a really interesting mental shift.
It is. A brand is often about projecting an identity, right? Recognition, market position, it feels relatively fixed, something you present to the world, but a living question. That's dynamic. It's ongoing, exploratory. It implies the project itself is kind of an experiment, a hypothesis you're testing out there, constantly forcing you to inquire and adapt.
And the specific question it's asking is how we create systems without replicating oppression. So how might that play out in those examples he gave?
Okay, let's take Journey to the West, a cultural exchange project.
Oh.
It could so easily, even accidentally, replicate harmful patterns. Cultural imperialism, maybe, or tokenism, or just really superficial engagement.
Right. Been there, seen that.
Yeah. So if you approach it as a living question, you have to constantly ask, are we really fostering mutual understanding here? Are we challenging stereotypes or just reinforcing them in a new package? Are we creating truly equitable platforms for different voices? The project itself becomes this ongoing investigation into ethical, cross-cultural work.
Okay. And Thunder Dragon Games. The gaming world definitely has its own complex systems. Access issues, representation problems, toxic communities sometimes, the game mechanics themselves.
For sure. So as a living question, Thunder Dragon Games would have to constantly ask, is our game design truly inclusive? Are we building healthy online spaces or letting toxicity run rampant? Are we reproducing societal biases in our stories or characters? Is the way we make money from the game exploitative? The leadership challenge is embedding that ethical questioning right into the core of how the game is made and run.
And the last one, RES Energy. Energy systems are so deeply tied into history and ongoing inequality, aren't they? Resource distribution, environmental justice.
Absolutely. So an energy project, framed as a living question, has to wrestle with who actually benefits from this energy? Who's bearing the environmental burden? Are we building systems that give everyone fair access to clean energy, or are we just reinforcing the old divides? Is the tech empowering communities or making them more dependent? It's about making sure the structure and the impact of the energy system you're building actively challenges, rather than just repeats those patterns of aggression.
So the leadership here isn't just about launching a successful venture and hitting targets.
No, it's about this constant interrogation. What's the ethical foundation? What's the real societal impact of what we're creating? Its leadership is this act of really conscious building, coupled with continuous ethical reflection.
And for you listening, this gives you a lens to look at your own work, right? Are your projects just career moves or static brands? Or could you reframe them as commitments to coherence, as these living questions?
Yeah. What systems, however small, might your work be unintentionally replicating? How could you build in that ongoing ethical inquiry into what you do, constantly asking, how can we build this better, fairer, more consciously?
It definitely pushes us beyond just hitting the goals, towards thinking much more deeply about the nature and the impact of what we create in the world.
Okay, our third unplanned chapter plunges us into the digital realm, a space that's just unavoidable for global leadership now. The title is Führen dem Digital Morgen, Leading in the Digital Tomorrow.
And the urgency here feels really strong. The author states flat out, if we don't shape our digital ethics, they will shape us.
That's a pretty stark warning, isn't it? The digital world isn't just evolving neutrally.
Yeah.
It's being built with assumptions baked in, algorithms with biases, business models that have real ethical weight. If we're just passive users, if we don't actively step up and define the values that should guide this space, well, the technology and the people building it will impose their own values.
Which might prioritize clicks or data or control.
Over human well-being and dignity, yeah.
He names some specific challenges that feel very real right now.
He does. He calls out the seduction of AI, the exhaustion of surveillance, and the loneliness behind hyperconnectivity.
Okay, the seduction of AI. We see amazing things AI can do, but what's the seduction part? Where's the danger?
Well, AI offers these incredibly powerful tools, right?
Hmm.
Automation, efficiency, even creative sparks that feel almost magical. The seduction is in that allure. It can tempt us to just adopt and roll out AI without enough critical thinking about its limits, its biases, the risks, the ethical minefields. It's so appealing that we might just overlook the potential for misuse or job losses or privacy erosion or creating really sophisticated systems of control or manipulation. Leadership needs to look past the shiny surface and grasp those deeper impacts.
Okay. Then the exhaustion of surveillance. That speaks to the human toll of feeling constantly watched, tracked, analyzed online.
Yeah, living under that constant gaze, whether it's governments or corporations vacuuming up data, or even just the pressure to perform on social media, it's draining. It
Wow.
creates this low-level but persistent anxiety.
Oh.
It makes you less spontaneous, maybe encourages self-censorship.
Mm-hmm.
That feeling of never being truly offline or unseen.
Mm.
It leads to this specific kind of fatigue, like the exhaustion of a nervous system that's always sort of on alert. Leaders need to get that straight, understand how digital practices can either make it worse or maybe help ease it.
And the third one, the loneliness behind hyperconnectivity. That sounds like a paradox. More connection, more loneliness.
It does seem counterintuitive, but think about it. Hyperconnectivity often favors quantity over quality, breadth over depth. We might have hundreds, thousands of connections, endless notifications, fleeting interactions.
But are they meaningful?
Often, not really.
Yeah.
Many are superficial, heavily curated, mediated through screens in ways that lack real vulnerability or presence. The performative aspect of a lot of online life, the endless comparison scrolling, it can actually leave people feeling more isolated, more disconnected from genuine human relationship, even while being constantly plugged in. It shows the massive difference between just digital interaction and actual human connection.
So the chapter outlines these pretty heavy challenges, but it also names hope.
Yeah.
And that hope is captured in this call.
Right.
We need leaders who can encrypt not just data, but dignity.
Wow. That's a really profound ethical shift, isn't it? We spend so much energy, so much money on the technical problem of encrypting data, protecting information.
Right, cybersecurity.
And the source is arguing we need an equally urgent focus on protecting something much less tangible, but maybe even more vital, human dignity. What does that even mean, though, practically? How do you encrypt dignity online?
It sounds like building respect for the person, for the human being, right into the code, into the platforms, into the culture of the digital world.
Exactly. It could mean designing algorithms that actively try to be fair and avoid bias. It could mean creating online spaces that foster healthy conversations and protect people from harassment and manipulation. It means fighting for digital privacy not just as a tech feature, but as essential for personal autonomy and dignity.
Treating users not just as data points to be mined.
Or eyeballs to capture for advertisers, but as individuals. People with inherent worth,
Yeah.
complex stories, vulnerabilities.
It's leadership that constantly remembers, as the source says, behind every screen is a nervous system, a story, a soul.
That reminder just grounds the whole ethical challenge in our shared humanity, doesn't it? It's so easy to abstract people into data streams or user segments online. But ethical leadership demands we remember the real, feeling person on the other end. It requires empathy in digital design, in policymaking, in every online interaction.
So this chapter really challenges you, the listener, to think about your own digital life and leadership. How do you engage with AI? Are you adding to that surveillance exhaustion for yourself or others, or trying to reduce it? Do your digital interactions build real connection or just add to the noise?
Yeah, how can you, in your own sphere of influence, whether it's big or small, actually advocate for and embody that principle of encrypting dignity?
It's a call for much more conscious digital citizenship and leadership, realizing just how high the human stakes are in shaping this online world we all inhabit now.
Okay, the next unplanned chapter shifts the mood quite a bit. The author calls it one of the most tender chapters.
Tender. Interesting.
Yeah, it moves us away from the, ethical architecture of the digital world to something more intimate. Gestures and rituals in global leadership. We're often taught leadership is about being sharp, strategic, verbally assertive, right? This chapter kind of gently pushes back on that. It reminds us of the power that lies beyond just words and analytical thinking.
He contrasts those common ideas of leadership with the power of nonverbal stuff, mentioning things like a bow, a shared silence, a tea ceremony. Things you don't usually find in a standard leadership textbook.
Not usually, no.
Yeah.
And yet, in so many cultures, and definitely when you're trying to bridge different contexts like East and West, these nonverbal elements carry enormous meaning.
How so?
Well, take a bow. It's not just bending over. It's a physical act signifying respect, maybe humility, cultural awareness. A shared silence, used well, can be way more powerful than filling the space with rushed words. It can create room for reflection, for presence, for deep acknowledgement during a tough negotiation, or even just a conversation.
Yeah, a tea ceremony.
It's a ritual packed with symbolism about connection, mindfulness, relationship building. These actions convey things that sometimes can't, or maybe even shouldn't, be said explicitly in words.
And the core concept here is beautifully put. Gestures carry the grammar of belonging.
Isn't that lovely? The grammar of belonging. It suggests these nonverbal cues are like a language in themselves.
With rules and meaning.
Exactly. A grammar. When you understand and use the gestures, the rituals, the rhythms of a particular culture appropriately, you're speaking that community's grammar of belonging. You're signaling, I'm present, I'm respectful, I'm trying to connect on a deeper level.
And if you get it wrong or ignore it.
You might accidentally signal disrespect, or that you're just an outsider passing through, no matter how nice your words are.
It's noted that this chapter is written for those who speak with hands, with eyes, with pauses. That acknowledges that communication isn't all about verbal skill.
Yes. It validates the power of those nonverbal channels. The nuance you can convey with a hand movement, the meaning in eye contact, direct or averted, the strategic use of pauses to add emphasis or create space. Leaders who are tuned into these nuances can build trust and rapport across cultures in ways that someone just focused on the words might completely miss.
And this leads to reinforcing the idea that leadership lives in ritual, in rhythm, in relationality.
This really broadens our idea of where leadership actually happens, doesn't it? It's not just in the big decisions or the speeches.
It's in the small, repeated things.
Yeah. It lives in the repeated practices that build culture and reinforce values. That's the ritual. It lives in the timing, the flow, the pace of how things get done, the rhythm. And crucially, it lives in the quality of the connections between people, the relationality, that trust, that empathy, that mutual understanding that makes effective collaboration possible.
It shifts leadership away from being purely transactional or top-down.
Towards something grounded in human connection, cultural sensitivity, and shared practice.
So for you listening, this is a really powerful prompt to just observe more closely. Beyond the words, what's the grammar of belonging being spoken around you? Where do pauses or eye contact or small gestures actually say more than the words?
Yeah, how can you become more aware of these nonverbal dimensions? How can you use them consciously to build stronger relationships and a deeper sense of belonging, especially when you're working with diverse groups?
It really encourages a more mindful, more present way of communicating, recognizing that real connection happens on so many levels, not just the intellectual or verbal.
Okay, that brings us to the final unplanned chapter, and the author describes this one not as a conclusion, but as prayer.
Prayer, wow.
Yeah, the sacred space of leadership beyond ego towards legacy.
Calling it a prayer really elevates it, doesn't it? Beyond strategy or skills. It makes leadership sound profoundly meaningful, almost spiritual.
It does. It suggests a deep reverence for the role, for the responsibility involved. Viewing leadership as something that goes beyond just personal ambition and connects to a bigger purpose. You know, a prayer is often an act of humility, of setting intention, of deep longing. And that reflects the author's plea here for a certain kind of leader to emerge.
And what kind of leader is that? He prays for leaders who don't want to conquer, but...
But to compost the old paradigms.
That's a striking image. Conquest versus composting.
It really is. Conquest is about dominance, right? Taking over, asserting control, often destroying what was there before. Composting. That's totally different. It's a process of breaking down what's old, maybe what seems finished or like waste, and transforming it into fertile soil for new growth.
Okay.
So it's a metaphor for leadership that doesn't try to just dominate existing structures or people. Instead, it works to gently, intentionally dismantle the outdated ways of thinking, the harmful systems, the worn-out beliefs, and turns them into the building blocks for something new, healthy, sustainable. It's transformation through decomposition and renewal, not through destruction.
And he outlines the qualities of this sacred leadership. What are they?
To lead with breath, with ethics, with reverence.
Okay, let's take those. Leading with breath. What does that evoke?
Presence, maybe. Being centered, mindful. Acting with conscious awareness, not just reacting. leading from a place of calm strength.
Okay, with ethics, that seems fundamental.
Underlines that moral integrity isn't just a nice to have for this kind of leader. It's core. Decisions guided by a strong ethical compass.
And with reverence.
That implies deep respect. For the people you lead, yes, but also for the work itself, the resources you use, the wider impact you have, a humble recognition of how interconnected everything is, and the inherent value in all of it.
These qualities feel very different from maybe more common, ego-driven, or purely power-focused leadership styles.
Absolutely. And that leads into what might be the most challenging, most transformative statement in the whole source. Leadership is not about becoming more. It's about becoming less of what is false.
Wow. Becoming less of what is false. That just flips the script on conventional leadership development, doesn't it? Which is usually all about adding more skills, more knowledge, more power, more status.
Right. It shifts the focus entirely, from accumulation to shedding. True leadership growth, from this perspective, isn't about adding more layers onto yourself. It's about removing them.
Removing what?
Removing the ego defenses, the insecurities, the pretenses, the learned behaviors that aren't truly you. Letting go of the need to look perfect or always be right. Letting go of the fear of vulnerability, the attachment to specific outcomes. It's this process of stripping away the falseness to reveal the authentic self underneath.
Because that's where the real leadership comes from.
That seems to be the implication, that true, impactful leadership resides in that authentic core.
So leadership becomes this process of unlearning, of letting go of the false stuff to reveal something more true and ethical within.
Exactly. Leadership is an ongoing practice. Self-awareness, humility, integrity, constantly questioning your own motives and shedding anything that doesn't align with your real purpose and values.
And this final chapter is presented as a whisper from the future, asking if we're ready to walk differently.
It's not a shout, is it? It's a gentle but persistent nudge, a call to look inward and consider change. The massive challenges we face, global inequality, climate crisis, digital transformation, bridging deep cultural divides, they seem to demand a different kind of leadership than the models that, frankly, contributed to creating some of these problems.
So the future isn't making demands.
No, it's quietly asking this fundamental question. Are we willing to change our approach? Can we lead from a place of deeper authenticity, ethics, connection?
And so we kind of wrap up this deep dive into these unplanned yet essential chapters.
Chapters on LGBTQIA plus leadership and belonging, founding with soul, digital ethics, gestures and rituals, and this idea of sacred leadership.
They weren't in the original outline, yet they're presented as absolutely vital.
And they're described as what happened when the book no longer belongs to the author but to the moment we are living through. That says so much, doesn't it?
Yeah. About the leader's responsibility to be fully present, fully responsive to what's happening now, to the urgencies of our time, even when that means stepping off the planned path into territory that might be uncomfortable or wasn't on the agenda.
It's about leadership that isn't just rigidly following a script, but has the flexibility, the courage, the sensitivity to address what feels truly vital right now.
And that brings us right back to that quiet question from the final chapter, directed at all of us. Are you ready to walk differently?
What does walking differently mean for you right now, in your life, in your leadership, after hearing about these insights?
Is it about fundamentally changing how you think about and use power, steering clear of domination? Is it about creating spaces of true safety where silence isn't the price of admission?
Is it maybe about seeing your own creative work, your projects, as these living ethical questions you have to keep asking? Or about actively working to protect human dignity in the digital sphere?
Perhaps it's about tuning in more deeply to that unspoken language of gestures and rituals, the grammar of belonging. Or is it that most profound challenge? The inner work of becoming less of what is false, so you can lead with more breath, more ethics, more reverence.
Just take a moment. Which of these unplanned essential chapters resonates most powerfully with you today? What's the unexpected insight that feels most vital, most urgent for your own journey, demanding your attention and maybe, a different way of walking in the world?